can't really talk about the auditor's office this day without talking about efforts to restrict our ability to find misspent money. When I came in, I was very conscientious to build a cross-partisan leadership team. So we had a Democrat, an independent, and a Republican, because I promoted an independent and a Republican to the most senior positions in the office, the two deputies that we had. They had both made campaign contributions to my opponent. I don't care, right? I want to serve the whole state. I want to serve people that don't agree with me. I want to serve people that don't even vote for me. And I think it's because we had that cross-partisan team that we ended up in my first term uncovering a record amount of misspent money. When you have a bunch of people in a room trying to make decisions at a high level who belong to different political parties, the question never gets asked, well, what's best for the political party, right? The question never gets asked, oh, what's best for so-and-so? It's just, well, what are the facts? Where did the money go? What did we do when this came up 7 years ago, right? The important questions that you should be asking to get your job done right. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that we ended up finding that huge amount of misspent money when we were doing it that way. The reaction to that was to restrict our ability to find misspent money. So we have a new law in the state of Iowa. It says that the state auditor's office has 8 categories of documents that we are no longer allowed to look at. There's also a 9th category, a kitchen sink category. It's basically like, well, and anything else that we might decide we want to keep private. This is a really bad idea. It's such a bad idea that the folks who actually create the standards for auditing, the American Institute of CPAs, wrote to the Iowa legislature to point out to them that it was a bad idea. That's in addition to people like Dave Walker, who was the U.S. Comptroller General for almost all of George W. Bush's presidency. He reached out to say, hey, you shouldn't do this, right? The Senate passed the bill first, the House then amended it. He read the amended House version and reached out to them to say, hey, you still shouldn't do this. It's still a bad idea. That bill was signed into law. And so this year we had to actually issue a report related to the Board of Parole saying we don't know what the reality was because they wouldn't provide us with the documentation to prove it one way or the other. We had a very credible tipster come to us and say that the Board of Parole, when they were conducting their hearings, was not following the law for how they were supposed to do that, right? So if somebody goes to prison, for most offenses at a certain point, they're eligible for release. The way their release gets determined is through sitting through a hearing with the Board of Parole. And there are rules for how the Board of Parole operates. This person came to us and said they're not following the rules. So we reached out and said, hey, we'd like to look at documentation related to this issue. He said, oh, yeah, we're familiar with that, and you know what? We identified that and we fixed it all on our own. Everything's good. We said, great, just give us the documentation anyway, because we're the auditor and we can't just take your word for it. And they said, no. And they wouldn't provide it. So we had to issue a report saying, well, we don't know if they were following the law because they were unwilling to provide the documentation necessary to show it one way or the other. This is a really bad idea, right? Just think about this. Lead us not into temptation is a phrase that many of us are pretty familiar with. What do you do when you're a state employee and you work in an area where the resources that you handle, whether it's tax dollars or equipment or whatever, you know is something that the state auditor can't look at? Aren't we leading you into temptation? We're literally telling you right up front, hey, by the way, all this work you do, don't worry about the auditor looking at it. Oh, okay. The only inevitable result here is an increase in waste, fraud, and abuse of tax dollars.